I recently started to introduce you to some specific biases and fallacies. However, why do we actually make those mistakes? Where do biases and fallacies come from? This and more in the new channel update. Welcome to the Soft Skill channel. My name is Sebastian Jung and I welcome you to the channel update April. We discussed some interesting topics recently, starting with our video for April 1st, the book review of Endlich Erfolglos, Finally Unsuccessful by Sebastian 23, which was no actual April Fool's joke, but something with a little humor. We had a look at a parody of guidebooks and self-help books. I think that turned out nicely. At least I enjoyed the book. It was quite funny. After that, we discussed a classic of self-management, the Eisenhower Matrix. I think this is a tool most at least know by name or have a vague general idea of, but as we saw, there are some possible problems, some likely mistakes people make, so I think it was good to discuss this in a bit more detail, and it is a nice addition to our videos on self-management. And finally, there was of course a book review. We discussed The Art of Thinking Clearly by Rolf Dobelli, which is a nice anthology of biases and fallacies. It presents a total of 52 individual ones. In German, there is also a sequel, Die Kunst des klugen Handelns, The Art of Acting Wisely, but unfortunately that one has not been translated into English. In English, another book by Dobelli is available, which is The Art of the Good Life. You notice the title is similar, and it also has this 52 things tagline. However, it is about an entirely different topic. It does not deal with biases and fallacies, but with a general advice about life by Dobelli. So what is to come in the next couple of weeks? Next week we continue the topic of biases and fallacies with another one, and that is the gambler's fallacy. A general theme in biases and fallacies is that we have trouble dealing with statistical information, that we are rather bad at making forecasts or predictions using statistical probabilities, and the gambler's fallacy is a nice example for that. After that, there will be another topic from the area of communication. We will discuss Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg, which is another classic of communication and a nice addition to the Schulz von Thun topics we already discussed. I will use as a source the first two books by Rosenberg, which is Nonviolent Communication, A Language of Life, and Living Nonviolent Communication, where he explains how his method can be applied to different kinds of situations. I think this is a nice basis. I haven't admittedly read all the books by Rosenberg. Maybe I will do that in the future, and maybe we will also have some book reviews about Rosenberg's books. Nonviolent communication is certainly an interesting topic, and it is one of those that are often presented in an oversimplified way. You might have some communication workshop where slide 5 out of 20 is about nonviolent communication, and the trainer gives a brief explanation such as, oh, this is where you tell the other person about your observation and the feeling it belongs to and the need it refers to, and you tell them what you want, and this is nonviolent communication. And of course, such a brief and sporadic introduction is not very helpful. Nonviolent communication is an entirely different approach to how you communicate, how you deal with other people. There is a somewhat complex philosophy behind it, and we will discuss that in the video. And of course, there will be a book review, and this time we will discuss a somewhat recent trend. We will have a look at the first book by Marie Kondo, which is The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying. Original Japanese title is Jinsei ga Tokimeku Katazuke no Maho. I think the English title is a quite literal translation. So this is from this whole area of tidying makes you happy, organized apartment means organized life, and so on. There we of course have a lot of other authors and people who propose that. Marie Kondo is just one of many here, but she is one of the most recent and most popular ones, so this will be interesting. I think this whole idea of tidying and organized and so on is, for me, it is always related to minimalism, even though the term is not used by Marie Kondo as far as I know, but this general idea of questioning what do I actually need, which things do I want in my life, in my home. This is very similar to minimalist ideas. We discussed minimalism briefly in a short introduction. I will link to it in the video description. As I said, Marie Kondo, a somewhat recent trend. She was quite popular a couple of years ago and still is. And there is plenty of material about her and about her KonMari method. We will, for starters, have a look at her first book that started the whole trend. And later we will probably have a look at some of the other materials to get a better understanding of the whole topic. Oh, by the way, we reached a nice milestone. We now have 100 videos on the English channel. This is quite nice. We are quite proud of that. This was plenty of work, but having 100 videos is quite nice. And of course, there will be more to come in the future. Now I'd like to say a few words about biases and fallacies. I introduced some specific ones to you. We discussed the Barnum effect and the sunk cost fallacy, and we will discuss the gambler's fallacy next week, and more are to come later. Last year, we had book reviews of Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow and of Nassim Taleb's The Black Swan. And those two books gave a very good basic understanding of what this topic of biases and fallacies is all about. We will also continue this. I will probably present to you Nudge by Thaler and Sunstein later, and I'm also interested in Noise, which is Kahneman's most recent book. But as I said, those provide a very good foundation for understanding the topic. However, this some time already has passed again since I did those book reviews, and maybe some of you don't want to watch a lengthy book review, but are still interested in those individual biases and fallacies. So I thought it would be nice to give a short introduction to provide some basics to this topic. Now, of course, the first question that comes to mind is, why do those biases and fallacies even exist? Why do we make those mistakes? Where does that come from? In our brains, there are permanently a lot of things going on, a lot of thoughts, of thought processes, and what we perceive as our thinking, our conscious thinking, our inner monologue, where we consciously deal with the topic, where we focus our attention on something, that is only a small part of it. A lot of thoughts, a lot of thought processes occur unconsciously and automatically. Imagine, for example, you are in the city, there are plenty of people, you're walking around, and suddenly you recognize someone you know. Before this, you didn't consciously look at those strangers and say, oh, there are so many faces, I should scan if I recognize anyone. You didn't do that. It happened entirely unconsciously. And there are plenty of processes like that scan our perception for things that are unusual, for things that might be dangerous, for things that should catch our attention. We have plenty of that. Kahneman described those two types of thinking as the slow thinking, which is our conscious thinking, and as fast thinking, which is the intuitive thinking that happens unconsciously. Now, the thing is, this fast thinking is fast because it uses a lot of shortcuts. Our intuitive thinking seems very easy, almost effortless, because it relies on heuristics, on rules of thumb. This way, we get decent results we can work with, and that work out fine in most situations, but that might lead us astray in specific situations. Systematic thinking errors occur, and those are the biases and fallacies. Let me give you a brief example. One simple heuristic our intuitive thinking uses is the assumption that things we encounter often, things where an example easily comes to mind, that those are things that happen often in general and that have a high probability of happening. Problem is, in our modern world, we get lots of information from the media, from the news. So, for example, we might end up thinking that terrorist attacks or plane crashes are something that happens frequently, something that is a real danger to us, that we need to be afraid of, even though those are super rare and the number of people killed that way is almost negligible. And other things, risks that are much, much higher, things like diabetes, stroke, heart attack, things that kill countless people day by day, those we might perceive as less of a risk, as less dangerous, because we aren't confronted with them that often. So biases and fallacies are an undesirable side effect of our way of thinking, of the way our thinking works. It cannot be avoided, of course. But it's important to note that biases and fallacies don't occur because we are so stupid or because our brain are so useless. They are a side effect of how our thinking works. Now, this fast intuitive thinking, that is necessary. We rely on that a lot. We can't do without that. It was important evolutionary. If there was some rustling in the bushes, it was a good idea to just start running. If you would start saying, oh, I wonder how high the probability is that this really is a lion, and I wonder what would be a good strategy if it was one, now you would probably be sorted out of the gene pool. So this was quite important, and it still is today. Think of the sensory overload we encounter day by day, of all the things we perceive in every second. Imagine you would have to deal with every perception consciously. Oh, there is a certain smell here. I wonder if this is something dangerous like fire or gas or poison. No, I think it's not. I think it is the perfume of that lady over there. Oh, she has used way too much of it. I wonder if it is a flower or a spice. Now, in the time you are pondering that, a million other things have happened that you haven't been aware of. So we don't even have the capacity to deal with everything consciously. And it's not just the perception, it is also lots and lots of small decisions. Is this important? Is this unusual? Does this mean danger? Should I focus my attention on that? Now, this is something we can't do consciously. We don't have the capacity for that. So this fast, intuitive, almost effortless thinking, that is something we need to rely on, and we have to accept that it comes with those biases and fallacies. And the way they distort our perception is not always and not entirely a disadvantage, I would say. For example, one effect this way of thinking has is that the world seems more coherent to us, more consistent, more explainable, more predictable than it actually is. We see order where there actually is chaos. And of course, for our mental health and our well-being, this is probably better. Since we feel safe and since we feel like we understand the world and we can influence things and so on. Now, of course, this also comes at a price. Our simplified worldview leads to prejudice, and it might lead to bad decisions in certain situations. But in certain situations, but overall, this feeling that the world is consistent and explainable might not be so bad. And in a similar fashion, we also get the impression that we are perplexed way less often than we should be. How often do you encounter a situation where you say, oh, I can't tell, I don't have any idea, I don't have any opinion here. We always have an opinion. We always think we know what's going on, even though this is often not really the case, and we often don't really have a rational opinion or a rational idea. And again, this gives us a feeling of safety and control, which is probably not that bad for our well-being. But again, it comes as a price, and in certain situations, there will be problems. We underestimate chance, which is a big topic in the Black Swan, and I might end up doing something stupid like investing all of my savings in some startup because I believe it will turn out great and it will certainly be successful, and yeah, this might turn out badly. Now, of course, one important question remains. What can we do about those biases and fallacies? How can we avoid major problems? The first and most important thing to note here is, if we know about a bias or fallacy, if we know how it works, it will still occur. We will still make the mistake. We can't influence our intuitive thinking that much. It will still work as before, even if we know that it will lead to a certain mistake. All we can do is we can use our conscious thinking to check and to question our intuitive thinking. We can say, oh, well, this is a situation where a certain bias or fallacy might occur. I better check my intuitive ideas, my first impressions, my impulses, and make sure I don't make a stupid mistake here. Now, this doesn't mean that we need to know every single bias or fallacy. There are quite a lot of them. Dobelli alone presented more than 100, and there are probably plenty more, but it's not necessary to know all of them. It's important, however, to be aware that we can't always trust our thoughts, our intuitions, our impulses, that we should better check and question them. And questioning things is what soft skills are all about, so this should come easy to us. And of course, we will discuss plenty more biases and fallacies here on the channel. Next week, we will talk about the gambler's fallacy, and more are to come later. We will see each other again next week. For today, I'll take my leave. Have a nice day. See you next time.